I'm still watching that Dan Carlin thing, the Supernova in the East, about the Japanese in World War II, and it's so fucking good. I'm like, I feel
Is
like
it making you like the Japanese more?
Oh, it makes me despise them.
Hating them?
It makes me despise those scummy pieces of shit. Oh, they're awful. The Australians were hardcore. They were, I think they're maybe on Guadalcanal or one of the big islands. Lots of Australians. They've been stuck there for a long time, not much food. And the Australians just got so good, they stopped losing men almost. And they got so good at killing. And they're talking about, they came upon one of their guys. They've been tortured. And there's a sign above their guy that said he took a long time to die. And it's like, this enraged the Australians. They went on a killing spree. It's just like, it's great. They find their guy like bent over with had been raped and with a bayonet up his ass. He's dead. Like they would. So after a while, there was no taking of prisoners at all, or even considering the taking of prisoners, or even messing with a body. They considered the dead bodies to be like zombies. They might get back up because they'd often play dead. They'd often be like one guy out there with a grenade under him, ready to pop up and take you with them.
I don't. That doesn't seem very honorable.
It's super honorable if you can take, a Marine down with you. But it makes me hate the Japanese, just despise them. Like the Battle of Midway is just one of the coolest stories ever. Basically, the Japanese show up with their 4 carriers, 4 aircraft carriers, and like a huge navy. And we're there with, I think 3, and one of them's fucked up already. It's already damaged from maybe a previous battle. And they're bombing land with their carriers when they spot our carriers. And so their guy has a decision, because it's a big deal to switch from land to air bombing and get the refueling done. Mm-hmm. And so he decides to take all of the guys who are bombing the land, let them all land, let them all refuel all the planes, including the ones that are like flying around doing defense. Basically, he brings every plane back and has it dressed, fueled, and like armed to go fight the American to go fight the American carrier. The alternative would have been to be like, send what we have now. And as soon as we can send more, send a little more. And as soon as we can send another one, every time we have a guy with a plane that's suited to attack the carrier group of the Americans, send it. He could have done that, because that's what the Americans did. The Americans had this, it was continuous. It begins at like, they know exactly what time, because it's the fucking Navy. And like the Americans were attacking continuously. Our torpedoes didn't work. The torpedo planes are had the most dangerous job. They have to fly at wave height and like detach this torpedo, and they would either go too low, or even if they hit, they didn't work. Like our torpedoes for the first 2 or 3 years of the war were bullshit. They literally didn't work. Yes, it went on for years. Torpedoes not working before they fixed the problem. Meanwhile, the Japanese had the best torpedoes in the world. So all the torpedoes are hitting and missing, or just not blowing up, doing 0 damage. And then the dive bombers come. It's starting to look like the Americans are going to lose, because the Japanese are fending them off so well. Then the dive bombers come, and the pilot had been at Pearl Harbor. And the pilot, you've got his first-person not viewpoint, but like his narrative, as he's coming down from high altitude straight down into one of the carriers. It's got a big red circle painted on the deck. And he's like, I'm aiming right for that 50-foot circle. And I drop my bomb and I pull up hard and I watch and watch. That's a biplane. But
this is the American Revolution. No, I'm confused.
But they hit 3 of the Japanese carriers. They destroyed 3 of the Japanese carriers in that battle. And that changed the whole war. Like, that's where the war changes. The Japanese lose 3 carriers, and even though our shit is heavily damaged, I think they sink one of our carriers in that battle. But the reason they sink our carrier, if I remember correctly, they came and attacked our carrier, fucked it up, dropped bombs through the deck. There's wooden decks on American and Japanese carriers. The Germans had steel decks, I think, or the British did. And so the thing's on fire. They radio back. 1 carrier down, 1 flat top down. That's what the Japanese say. But the crew on that boat was so good and experienced at putting out fires and repairing that they put the fires out, repaired the deck, and were launching planes off of it. So when the Japanese get back, they think 1 carrier's down. It's not. In fact, it's been repaired to full power already before they can get back. And so they say, oh, we found another carrier. And so they hit it again. I think then they sink it. So they think they've taken out 2 carriers when they've only taken out 1.
I think I have this right. Early in World War II, there was an attack on an American ship of some sort, naval ship, and they took out the firefighting team. And then something that would have been extinguished was sunk. So then the Navy made a change in tactic and trained every single sailor to have a firefighting role, so that you couldn't just take out the right 37 guys and sink a ship. And that lends to what Kyle was saying, like, they were so good at firefighting because literally everyone on the ship is a firefighter.
World War II aircraft carriers were triply flammable, I think he puts it. And that they're
compared
full
to
of
what?
Compared to anything, compared to any other naval vessel.
Those things are so flammable.
Compared to any other naval vessel, because they're made of wood and they have all the fuel for the planes and then the bombs for the planes, and they also have guns on them. So like have all the ammo for those guns, all those 5-inch shells or 8-inch shells or whatever the fuck, and all the powder that launches them. So if you hit the wrong part, it's just they would jump out of the water. Those big gigantic naval vessels, destroyers and stuff, when the magazine goes off. In every narrative I've heard, like different battles, they talk about the boats jumping out of the water from the power of the explosion.
Nowadays, Russian tanks are curiously flammable. Like I see them just drop a grenade in the open hatch. So if the Russians abandon their tank, maybe it's immobilized or something, then the Ukrainians will come along and drop a grenade in the empty tank just so that it can't be repaired and reused. And it's surprising to me just how often they seem to burst into flames. All the rounds that are stored inside catch fire and blow it up.
Mm-hmm.
I guess that makes sense. You're probably not like spending a ton of time fireproofing against like a grenade attack at the last second, because it's like it's already over if that happens.
The American tanks have their magazine in a separate compartment that has blowout panels. So when it explodes, it has a released explosion that vents, so you don't kill everyone and lose the turret.
Well, that's a much better idea.
It's a way better idea if you're inside the tank.
I'd so much rather be in that tank than the one where you just burn alive.
We've got AC as well, like good air conditioning in there, 100%. Right.
Well, I bet the Russians probably don't have good AC because it's Russia.
I think he said that Russians don't have AC. I think he said the Israelis have AC suits, like there's a hose that goes onto what they're wearing, and the Americans have AC, if I recall. That's something like that. Fucking
cool. I'd love an AC suit. Just walk around all the time, like water circulating in it.
I think it was powered by the tank. Like the tank has a hose that you put on your, I'm making it up, shoulder, and now you're air conditioned inside.
I wonder if it's like, I would want liquid to be radiating through it, like an engine radiator.
Like you're a computer?
I am a computer.
Well, I guess
keep me cool.
Technically,
I want like hell. I want it all up around my head and my groin. I want like armpits. I want that.
You're not going to kill a lot of foes if you're all sweaty.
I don't intimidate with lack of shrinkage.
I just want
to be sweaty, dangling sweaty balls.
Sweaty balls long. It's me at full size entering battle.
That's how we beat the Japanese. Is they saw our sweaty dicks and balls, and they're like, "Oh, we cannot possibly compete with this," because they were cold.
I've been watching Dan Carlin's Supernova in the East. If you don't know, Dan Carlin's basically a historian. He does these long form, heavily researched, well put together audio videos. It's audio, but I'm watching it on YouTube. I'm 8.5 hours in, and Pearl Harbor just ended. It's 8.5 hours until Pearl Harbor stops. Like till you get to Pearl Harbor, and then he tells those events. Like the third
was the
video,
starting point.
Yeah.
Did you explain that?
Japan invading China in 1931, and like the reasons for their
so it's been like a decade.
Yeah, I was like, if the starting point was like the beginning of recorded time, then Pearl Harbor's pretty far along.
Yeah, then he's flying.
Well, it's called Supernova in the East. He's talking about Japan, the rising sun of Japan, going supernova and turning imperialist. The motivations behind that are very important. Understanding like the racial undertones of the whole world and how the Japanese were underestimated by like the entire world. Like they were like, oh, they're very good at copying technology, but they could never craft their own because the Japanese were in this isolationist period. The Japanese were in this isolationist period for a very, very long time, hundreds and hundreds of years. They come out of it and they send envoys to all the major countries. So they send one to England, learn how Navy works. They copy the English Navy. They're the best Navy in the world. Why wouldn't they? They send them everywhere. Military, art, history, everything. They want to be the best at everything. And it's interesting. He describes the Japanese people as just like everyone else, just more so. And it's like, yeah, they do everything with such an intensity and such rigor that it goes overboard. And then because they've had this period of isolationist, they've romanticized just how rigid to Bushido their ancestors were, just how good the way we look at maybe medieval knights and think of knights in shining armor who do only good, tell only truths, protect the weak. Okay, all right. Our politicians say some similar vows. They don't keep up with them. But because these guys have never known personally that ruling Bushido military class, they've heavily romanticized it. And so he tells all this to sort of load you up for what's coming in World War II. I'm fascinated. It's so good.
So you're done with the engines already?
I learned all that there was.
All that there was to know.
Yes,
now,
there's almost 4 days of history there.
What I did was I went through all the resources available to me without going to like a library or something.
Yeah, without a book.
Well, it's like as I go further, it's like, yeah, I know this. I know about that ritual. I know that they would tie those loops through the skin in their chest and then tie it to the pole and do their dance for days on end. I know that tribe had their spear had a crook in the end, like a shepherd's crook, and they would stab it into the ground and they tie a piece of leather from that to their leg to make sure they didn't take one step back. Because I went through it all.
I wanted you to learn all the details of the different human sacrifice rituals so you could teach me about all the ways they varied. How did the Incas do it? How did the Mayans do it? Did the Aztecs revolutionize it?
So they believed. So the Aztecs believed that the more the person suffered and screamed, the more powerful the blood magic would be, so that they could build a closer bond to the gods or entities they were trying to appease or connect with. So it was very important that this person die afraid and terrified.
Thank God the Spanish showed up.
So they would hold you down. 4 people would hold you down, sort of almost bent over backwards over this like bowed stone structure so that you're really exposed. He would plunge the knife in. And the goal was to tear your heart out rapidly, like as fast as possible. So you're alive when it happens. They want to show you your heart if possible. Like and you can imagine you do this 1,000 times. Maybe you get good at it. Like you're like that guy, that Japanese guy slicing up those tuna. You're just in and out. Heart.
Yeah. You're like Jiro dreams of sushi, but with torture.
But with torture. Yeah. With ripping hearts out.
Yeah. Probably a good thing we put a stop to that.
I don't know.
Spanish, at least.
You think it was working, the human sacrifice?
Well, they lost badly when like a group much smaller than them showed up.
That's told part that of it. Earth's temperature has started rising ever since the human sacrifices stopped.
So Cortez only had a few hundred men with him, and there's that famous quote of him like, "Never in history have such men as us come so few and conquered so many." But they'd also went around and they'd gotten all the tribes that the main Aztec aristocrats or whatever had been bullying forever, and were like, "Hey, you tired of them raiding your village and sacrificing your people, selling?" Because that's what they do. They weren't necessarily killing like your neighbor and sacrificing him. You'd go get those jungle people. Like it's a lot like Mel Gibson's Apocalypto, if you've seen that, which is fantastic.
Yeah. A lot of the South Americans and Central Americans were very stoked when they got that offer from the Spanish, at least from what I learned, where they're like, "Oh, these gun people are going to save us from those, step pyramid building sacrificers. This is kind of nice."
Yeah, they just wanted gold, though. They just wanted gold. The Spanish had this idea that that El Dorado existed. And part of it was because early explorers, English explorers who had gone into the Amazon, either came back and lied or saw something we still haven't found. That's the only two ways.
They were fibbing, looking for more funding.
That's where I want to be too. But here's the facts. The guy who came back and told the lies was like, "Please send me back. Send me and my son back." And they gave their lives looking for what he had found before, leading these expeditions down the Amazon, looking for these golden cities and these huge civilizations that were supposedly there. Some people say that disease was introduced and those cities just went away. All the people died. They ended up melting back into the jungle when the leadership and the whole, Tower of Cards came tumbling down.
Ruins.
Well, we haven't plowed what they've done is that they can't. The Amazon rainforest is still there, so they've used that. It's not LiDAR. They've used ground penetrating aerial radar of some kind, some sort of sensor, and they found large compounds and large where cities once were, but not where cities were a couple hundred years ago, where maybe they were hundreds and hundreds of years ago. But then it is the Amazon rainforest, so I don't know. But
is
I
Carlin
love
the guy who talks about like ancient civilizations where it's like there have been collapses.
I think it's Dan
like
Carlin.
George Carlin's the comedian.
Oh,
right?
Dan Carlin.
So
Is he the one who's like they were not Atlantis, but like imagine an analogy for Atlantis, like a sophisticated more technologically advanced society that got eliminated.
That's Graham Hancock. So Graham Hancock, as much as I enjoy his works on Göbekli Tepe and all the books he's written, I've read a couple of them. He's more on the side of like, wouldn't it be cool if, let's kind of go along with this and it'll be fun to imagine that
would be cool if.
Dan Carlin is a very respected, heavily researched historian. So he does stuff on Genghis Khan, stuff on Alexander the Great. And when you hear him speak, you'll realize he's not making his mind up about something. He'll read from contradictory sources, for example. You're like, well, when we're discussing the rape of Nanking, it's like, okay, so here's what these people say happened. Here's what these people say happened. And here's what these people say happened. Here's the evidence. Here's a missionary who was there in Nanking, a white Westerner, and what they said happened. Here's this. And you draw your own conclusions at the end. He'll be like, look, these numbers go from 1,000 to 100,000. And just so we're clear, the 100,000 isn't the highest number that people claim. Some people say it was 5 million. It's just when the Japanese went into China, they killed for a decade. When they raped Nanking, as it's called, it wasn't like, he compares it to the Assyrians taking a city and how 3 days of barbarism and the city fell. And, burning, raping, pillaging, killing the dogs and cats, raping the boys, raping the women, killing all the men, slaughtering everything. And then the king tells the story of how I levied the rivers and allowed them to flood the city. It was nothing but what was before a sprawling metropolis was now a flooded meadow. Nature itself could not have wrought such destruction upon my enemy. And it's like, holy shit. But when you get to Nanking, 3 months of occupation and not just hanging out, raping and killing. For 3 months, they stayed in this gigantic, the capital of China at the time, and just raped and murdered and tortured and killed. And they go through like the eyewitness testimony of the Westerners and what they saw, like all of the ways they found bodies, the conditions that they were in. And it's just everything you can imagine, cut apart, dissected, split down the middle, split in half, just all sorts of evil.
What was the build the Sector 7, something like that in World War II?
Oh, Unit 731?
Unit 731, that's what it was.
Yeah. And also a thing that I didn't know was the Japanese were extremely, they believed that they were the master race of Asians. They thought that
they still do.
They believed it enough that the extermination of those people seemed like a good idea, and the subjugation of them that seemed like a good idea.
One of my close friends is she's Asian, Chinese, and like born in China and then grew up mostly here. And she'll like every once in a while, if someone asks, they'll be like, what's the racism situation like over in Asia? And she'll just be like, oh, like so much more than like white people could handle. Like white people are so sensitive about all that shit. Like she'll be like, yeah, the Japanese, they think they're, the cat's pajamas. They think they're at the tippity top. And then, the Chinese think they're at the tippity top. So I think we're a little better than the Japanese, They got one over on us a few times, admittedly, but I think we're number one. And then I'd say Koreans probably rank 3. And then someone asked her, was like, what about like Thailand, Laos, the Philippines? And she's like, oh, us, the Japanese and the Koreans all could not care less about the jungle Asians. We're all better than the jungle Asians.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Like I've heard that term before.
Yeah.
And the record is worse than that for the Japs and the Chinese, like 1v1s, because
it goes back so far.
Genghis Khan's grandson, Kublai Khan, was the leader of China. He was sitting on the throne of China at the time. And he was the one who started that first invasion of Japan, where they were going to send 50,000 troops or something by ship across the gap and there was a massive storm, sunk their fleet, and they call it the divine wind, the tsunami, and then or not tsunami,
typhoon.
It was a storm, but the divine wind is kamikaze. That's the word. That's the word.
Oh,
yeah.
Okay.
it means divine wind. And so
what's your next era?
I mean, it's gonna take me so fucking long just to cover the Japs in World War II. I probably got another 20 hours of that.
Does part of you want to go like super ancient with it, like the Babylonians?
I want to hear Kyle become a Vietnam expert. I think that's interesting.
Well, they touch on Vietnam as it pertains to Japan and colonialism. Because the French had been fighting in Vietnam for a long time, right after World War II. Their fight sort of begins in like 51 or so in Vietnam.
I don't know.
Yeah, I don't like Vietnam. Sucks. Vietnam's no fun. You've got so much political American shit where like nobody's resolute in what we're trying to do, and you've got just a boring war. Just not a fun war.
Understand how we were so heavily committed, yet somehow fighting with one arm behind our back, and what the logic was for the way that we did this, and
public opinion, getting reelected.
Yeah, that's a challenge. Winning wars with a democracy.
Yeah,
winning wars when they're
winning very unpopular wars.
Yeah, when you look at how
trying to maintain popularity.
I mean, when wars are won, it's nasty. It's a war. It's bad. People get bayoneted in the streets. We talk about the American soldiers quickly trying to rush the battlefield so they could execute all the dead Japanese before the officers could call them off. Because if you tried to deal with them, they almost always had a grenade in their hand. Or
remember that grenade in fucking the
true story.
You guys don't like it as much, but the Band of Brothers Japanese version,
Pacific.
Yeah,
I've seen it multiple times, and a lot of the stuff that's happens in the Pacific are straight from real accounts. The guy cutting the teeth out of the guy's head, like that really happened.
That makes sense. They were using real gold. You may as well, make a little money
while the guy was still alive.
Okay, well at least kill him,
with a knife. Yeah, and paying no mind to him screaming as the knife like missed as he butted it into his mouth.
I think he's at risk of getting bit.
Yeah,
he's got a big fucking knife.
I don't want to brag, but I would have killed him first. That's just my morals.
I don't want to brag, but I'd have used my Leatherman pliers if I was there.
You'd be like,
the way better tool.
All right, Tojo, this is gonna hurt you more than me.
This Woody guy's a psychopath. He's not even keeping the teeth.
That was a regular too. I know.
I'm excited for you to bounce around past World War II, and then I want to learn more about like Babylon, Assyria, those ancient Persia, the ancient Greeks. It's such a cool time, and there's so much to learn. Does he not do stuff about those eras?
All of that. The next thing is going to be Alexander the Great. I want to learn about Alexander the Great because he seems like almost a fictional character. He's such a badass. Like he's conquering. Did he win his first battle? He's 16 or something. Like
dude, he makes you feel like a loser. Like they show like images of what he conquered and how much there was, and it's like, here's what he had after his 85th battle at the age of 21, and it's like, oh, like this.
Dude, it's rough to compare yourself to great people.